Well, the bells have tolled, so we need to make a start. So I'm Paul Harper, Chair of Planning and Healthier, Stronger Communities Policy Advisory Committee. That's a bit of a mouthful, wasn't it? I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight, and anybody who may be watching this remotely, although I think that's probably unlikely. I just wanted to check. Obviously, the council is going to is recording it now, and it will be available on the council's YouTube channel. Whether anybody else present tonight may wish to record any of the meeting or not. No. Okay. And then the other thing, which I think everybody knows, is there's no planned fire alarms tonight. So if those bells toll away, Cassie will shoot down and find out what's going on, and if there's a fire, I'm sure she'll make sure we all get out safely. So, um, so then if we go on to the first item, which is apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Claire Keeley. Everybody else I can see is here. So are there any substitute members? No, there's no, okay. Then there's no urgent items, and I'm not aware, we don't have any visiting members and none on the screen. That takes us to number 5, which is disclosures by members and officers. Anybody anything to disclose tonight? Nope. Anybody been lobbied tonight on any of these items? Okay. Then number 7 is, oh, Councillor Thompson.
Just to note in advance, Councillor Harper, as you know, I'm ward member for Boxley Downs, so when we come to an item relating to the Medway plan, I will be asking for your indulgence under that heading.
Thank you for that, Councillor Thompson. When we get to that item, I'll invite you to speak as a ward member for the area. So number 7 is to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the nature of the information. And I'm proposing when we get to them that we probably move into private session to consider the statement of common ground between Maidstone and Medway Council. There's a number of issues, I think, which came up in the briefing yesterday, which I think we probably want to discuss. So if everyone's happy with, when we get there, we'll move into private session. Okay, great. And then that brings us to the first page, which is pages 1 through to 7, which is our minutes of our meeting from October. So again, if we go through for accuracy, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, 5, 6 and 7. So I take it everybody's happy that they're an accurate record. And so can we just agree them? Agreed. Thank you. Then we go on to number 9, item 9, which is a forward plan, which starts on page 8. Over to the members of the Cabinet and the leader present tonight, if there's anything they would wish to add for tonight. No, I don't know if there's any member of the committee wishes to mention any points. No, okay, well if we can agree to note that. That takes us on to item 10. Well, at this rate we should be through by 6:45. Item number 10, which is the Corporate Strategy Year 1 Action Plan update, starting on page 13. And I think, as other days, it can be introduced by Councillor Jeffries, the leader.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so we're taking the action plan that was agreed February time, March time, doing a half year sort of sharing of where things are up to. It's been divided into 3 for the 3 packs. This pack has got 1 action completed, 13 on track, 2 have got slight delays and 1's been paused. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. So is Anna, who's going to answer all the detail.
Anybody got any questions they'd like to ask at all on this item? Yeah, Councillor Povey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to be naughty and hope you won't have to stop me midstream tonight, as I happened on the last meeting I was on. On page 19, 2, 3, the fifth column, I think it's the fifth, it's one down, it says informal cabinet. We'll be discussing this on the 3rd of September. I just wonder if it's possible to get an update on that, and it may just be the same as the cell above where it's held up by the SPD.
That's the nighttime economy one, isn't it? If I'm, yeah. So yes, that meeting, I think actually happened about a week after that. We had a workshop with a guy, Mike Kill, who is now an international advisor on the nighttime economy. We've taken a lot of notes. We're feeding that into the town centre work as it starts to progress through probably the next quarter or so.
Okay, maybe we could just update the spreadsheet at some point. Thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. On page 23, where we're talking about the SPDs for the strategic sites, I feel this really needs to be split up. So you've got the SPDs for Lidsing and Heathlands, and work on the Invicta draft SPD was paused. So I don't really see how we can continue to say that that's on track. We need to split those and make sure that that is recorded separately.
Fair point.
Anybody else? Otherwise, I've got a couple of questions. I understand that in terms of the towns, the town centre on page 19, we've got obviously the strategy, the movement strategy, the nighttime economy that's been referred to, obviously, and heritage as well. And then some of the UK, what's the S stand for? Something's Prosperity Fund. Anyway, UK SPF, which also will link into the town centre. And I think my understanding is you're likely to be bringing something at some stage to the council, through the council, in terms of all these items.
Yes, so we've had some. Later in the municipal year, we were planning on bringing some of the outputs from the work we've been doing. We've had discussions at Cabinet through this year, gradually developing the town centre work. We know we've got to start to. I think the next steps are probably reinvigorating the town centre councillor meetings and making sure and checking with some of the people in the room the work we've been doing, just to make sure that we're heading on the right track, and then we'll start to bring papers back through PAC and Cabinet.
Thank you for that. I suppose a quick question for Councillor Harwood, perhaps, in terms of on page 22, the extension of the Kent Downs A&OB, or National Landscape as it is now, onto the Green Sand Ridge. I know we're obviously in discussions with the Kent Downs National Landscape Committee or whatever. I just wonder, and it says obviously any extension could take a number of years. I just wonder how sort of positive you might feel about whether that's likely to happen, because it will be quite pertinent to our next iteration of the local plan.
Yes, there are two tracks to this. The Kent Downs Joint Advisory Committee and the Kent Downs National Landscape Unit are doing a specific piece of work linked to the refresh of the Kent Downs management plan, and within that they're identifying potential extension areas. So that's a piece of work that's going on, and within the next iteration of the Kent Downs National Landscape Management Plan there will be an identification of the candidate areas, if you like, that given a fair wind they would wish to see extensions, and that is by no means a done deal, because there are differences of opinions across different local authorities, particularly between Swale and Canterbury, where Swale are very keen that an area is made part of the national landscape, and Canterbury are less keen, let's say. But that piece of work is going ahead. An independent landscape consultant was commissioned by the Kent Downs unit to look at the potential extension areas and the areas within Maidstone Borough, essentially the Greensand Ridge, came out with very high scoring, so it did meet the criteria for National Landscape, and it's only to be expected because the rest of the Greensand Ridge to the west of us is within the National Landscape. There was some historic reason why it stopped a boundary, and our bit of the Greensand Ridge was historically not protected. And I cannot say what that was, but we need to look right back in the kind of mists of time when it was established. So that's one track. That's the, if you like, the macro track. On the micro front, because the area that we are talking about an extension for in Maidstone Borough is relatively small. It's 51.15 square kilometres, which is less than 20 square miles. I wrote to the new Secretary of State at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, asking whether there's any potential for a correction, if you like, just to tweak that boundary. I received a response towards the end of last week from the Under Secretary of State, Mary Cray, and in that it was a very interesting, it was a very long and interesting letter, in that it stated that no new work on national park extensions was in the pipeline or likely to occur. However, there is still a little bit of life, let's say, within works around national landscapes, and it draws out the work that's currently going on in Surrey as part of the Surrey Hills, where there's again a kind of correction going on there. So, in response to that letter to Mary Cray, where she essentially said Natural England are dealing with this week I have written to various people in Natural England, including their chair, just pointing out that Maidstone Borough Council has just commissioned a new consultant's work for a new landscape character assessment. So we are doing a lot of evidential work, if you like, which will be current, and just putting the idea there that this is not a huge amount of work. We understand the budgetary and the staffing pressures that Natural England are under, but if the UK is going to deliver its 30 by 30 commitment on 30% of the UK supporting enhanced biodiversity, it's just this kind of extension that will help deliver it. So that letter's in the email post, and we'll see what happens next. But yes, one piece of work, the Kent Downs and JAC piece of work, that is something which potentially were years in gestation. I'm hoping, by being annoying and keep going back, that they think it's less trouble dealing with this small piece of work than it is keep having to deal with my letters. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's very comprehensive, and we just have to hope we get a positive response from all the effort you and the officers are putting in on that. The only other item I was interested in was the very last one on this, which is around the museum. Obviously, recently we opened up the Maidstone Past and Present Gallery, following on from the previous gallery the year before. So I'm sort of keen to see the momentum being carried through, and I think, speaking with Councillor Thompson the other day, I think that probably is still in hand, isn't it?
It is very much so, Councillor Harper. I'm delighted to draw attention to a press release that either has or is just about to be sent out, asking for community support for the so-called Community Cabinet, Maidstone's answer to Trafalgar Square's fourth plinth, presently occupied by a display of Polish community items. So we're warmly inviting those in the wider community to borrow and set up in that space, and I'll refer people to the press release on that regard. You councillors, I hope, will notice that we've are delighted to acknowledge the work of Natalie and the museum staff in securing a considerable grant in a very short period of time, and we are in the business of engaging Modest Consultancy to scope out all of the possible implications of the development and care and stewardship of our museum, not least in the light of LGR.
Councillor Russell, thank you very much for
Sorry, I've just been thinking and digesting about the points that Councillor Harwood was making about the Greensand Ridge, and it just occurred to me, would we be having any form of public consultation if we were going to put this extra area in? Because obviously it does have impacts for residents and businesses in terms of, you know, planning and things like that. So, or is this just something you're ploughing ahead with as part of the Cabinet?
Any fine, if I may come back to you, Chairman, this is the nub of it, because any final decision on a variation of the boundaries of the national landscape, that would be Natural England who would be undertaking the consultation, if you like. I think actually most of the impacts from being a national landscape are positive, but you're right, in terms of some land uses and so on, it may fetter your ability to do things, but that's part of what will, you know, it would not be us undertaking that. It would be, because the national landscape is a national designation, it would be Natural England who would be undertaking that outreach as to what the local support and whether it's a good idea. But I think in the current climate with development pressure and so on, I think developers might be against it.
Okay, if there's no further comments or issues from anybody, if I draw people's attention to page 14, we're being asked to note progress against actions within the Year 1 action plan. I'm happy to move that. Is that seconded? Yeah, thank you. Everyone happy to agree that? Yeah, okay, thank you. Which takes us on to item 11, which is the approval of local wildlife citations. Starts on page 26. If I hand over to Councillor Harwood to introduce the item.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think this is really a very positive development, because Kent Wildlife Trust have identified 2 sites that they believe, based upon their selection criteria of the most important, distinctive and threatened species and habitats, to have identified 2 sites which are actually owned and maintained by Maidstone Borough Council, I think is testament, particularly in these cases, to the work of many local volunteers who help maintain and keep these 2 sites tidy and enhance their hospitability for wildlife and for local people. The one that I really want to draw attention to, I think, is the real inner urban one in Butland Hill, because you would think, you know, it's the site next to the Barrack Station, opposite Clare House, and with apartments and flats surrounding it. But if you look at the citation and some of the species that have been found there, it's a really interesting site, because if you look back at Ordnance Survey maps, for some reason, this little area, no matter what's gone on around it, has stayed kind of undeveloped. And by virtue of that, it's still got relics of its agricultural past. There are still, every time you dig a hole, you get arable weeds, things like pheasant's eye and caraway and deal and so on suddenly appear. And then there are hedgerows running through the site, which are obviously the ghosts of an ancient woodland, because they've still got things like great wood rush and wood sage and wood sedge and bluebells and the sorts of things you associate with ancient woodland. And then just to add to the mix, it's got a number of water features within the site. And one of them, which is a really strange linear feature, which is lined with flagstones. If you look back at the Ordnance Survey maps again, from early in the 19th century, you can see this rectangular water trough within them. And by virtue of that, and the water in there is, because there's a spring line, is very pure. So it's got, not algae, like stoneworts, which need the cleanest of water growing there. And it's really, you're in there and you can hear the sirens and the cars rushing past. But the thing which is most lovely about it is there's lots of flats surrounding it, and when the kind of children are walking past, you hear the little children saying, Mum, can I go and see the ponds? Mum, can I go in the nature reserve? And for youngsters who are growing up in flats, to have somewhere where it's actually quite natural right on their doorstep, I think really shows the importance of urban green spaces, especially semi-natural ones. As regards the other site, the extension to the Bluebell Hill banks and verges. Again, that's a piece of land. It's sandwiched between High Speed 1 and the A229 Bluebell Hill, but it exhibits the flora and fauna you find in really kind of unspoiled downland. And there are things like white helleborines and broad-leaved helleborine. There are chalk downland butterflies like small blues and dingy skippers and chalk hill blue and green hairstreak. So I think they're really kind of worth their designation. But I would like to add that it's not us who are doing the designating. Is Kent Wildlife Trust are seeking the designation, and they're not even coming to us because they happen to be owned by Maidstone Borough Council. The reason why they're coming to us is that there's a service level agreement between Maidstone Borough Council and Kent Wildlife Trust, that the council has the final decision to approve new and changes to existing local wildlife sites on the register. And if you look in your big kind of A3 proposals map that goes with the local plan review, the ones with the blue dots are local wildlife sites, and so you can see that they're kind of scattered across the borough, but are mostly within very rural areas. So that's why I think it's particularly interesting and important that we've got some urban or urban edge sites coming in. You will see appended to the papers the detailed citations, which give you the detail on the site, but you will also see there is a draft letter which is essentially my giving the sign-off to Kent Wildlife Trust that we acknowledge these sites being receiving the declaration and the designation, and that is quite time limited, and as you can see we've already got 12th of November written on the letter, so hopefully with a fair wind from this committee we can get back to Kent Wildlife Trust and hit the deadline. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Harwood. Yeah, I've got Brian Clark and Claudine Russell and I was. I've got a couple of points. So, what's happened?
It may not be working.
I've hit a button.
Is that working now?
Yeah, I think you're okay now.
All right.
Hit the wrong button.
So, in the North Lewes area, which is now part of Lewes Parish, we had two woodlands that actually many years ago we actually asked Tony's help to come across and identify species within the woodland. I don't know if you know the fire station. It had been bought by Tesco's. At the time, there was sort of a general sense that the woodland in Pheasant Lane could be an overspill car park, as they often do. They build the site and then they extend it like they did in Farley Hill. And it then got moved to Taylor Wimpey. Taylor Wimpey then owned the wood also, and we actually worked with Maidstone Borough Council, Deanne Cunningham and Tony, to see if there was any chance that we could get protection for that wood. And when it looked like there was the potential, because Natural England were looking at smaller parcels, smaller hectareage of woodland, we actually extended it to include 5 acre wood, which is further up. And it was a little bit of an opportunistic thing, but we were able to protect those woods as ancient woodland, which has had a long-term effect on them actually going forward, especially given it was owned by a developer. And although Taylor Wimpey originally had hope value for that area, we went back to them to say, we've got a few trees there that will form a coppice sweet chestnut. You have got a liability now with no opportunity to do anything to monetize that site, and that site was moved across to the community for a peppercorn, and it's now managed by a team of volunteers. We've got so many of these sites in Maidstone, even at the landfill site, not the landfill site, the waste centre. If you look at the corner of Farley Hill and Burial Ground Lane, the whole corner of that site, which you don't see from within, is a former orchard. But if you look at on satellite maps, you'll see that the site is actually a square in its sort of shape. But when you go inside, that whole section is sort of left. So it's been left as a overgrown. You can still see the apples in that area of completely secured land. So I think it's very important, and the fact that Kent Wildlife Trust is looking at these sites is very good. I think that well, I'm very happy to propose the papers. I think we should be doing more of this. We've got many more sites in Maidstone, and we should find this very encouraging. And as you say, there's that little pocket of green space. You look at it on satellite images. It's worth doing that, because I'm sure many people drive past and they just think, oh, there's a little bit of curtilage there and there's flats in the background. But it really is quite a sizable section of woodland. So I'm happy to propose the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Russell.
Thank you. I wonder if you could help me with my understanding of this. So the Buckland Hill one, yeah, I've just looked that up, I can see where that is. The Bluebell Hill one, where it says the owners, KCC Highways, Maidstone Borough Council and private, firstly, have we consulted with has Kent Wildlife Trust consulted with all of those people? And also, I remember there was some consultation recently for like a road scheme on the Bluebell Hill, and I wondered, is that in exactly the same area, or is this a slightly different area? Just to have the full picture, I just wanted to know if it was impacting this or it was a separate area.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. What is proposed, there's an existing local wildlife site, the Bluebell Hill Banks and Verges. Most of that is owned by Kent County Council. A little bit by Tunbridge and Morling Borough Council. This land, which is basically the land up Old Chatham Road, belongs to Maidstone Borough Council. So the extension, it is coming to us not because we're the landowner, but because the southern part of the site, the bottom paddock, is within Maidstone Borough. So in the same way that you are receiving this report, Tunbridge and Morling are receiving a similar report, and the top end of the site, the north part of the site, it will be down to them to sign off. So we're only looking at the bottom half. In terms of the potential for highway widening works, yes, there was a consultation. Maidstone Borough Council made a response, and there was the ward councillors are here, the local residents were heavily involved, and we objected to the widening, actually, which impacts this part. We supported the roundabout changes, but not the widening, which we saw as not compliant with the NPPF. But that is still, being discussed, and there's no detailed scheme that's out there. So we don't know what will happen in the future. But in terms of local wildlife site, unfortunately, it's not as strong as a triple SI or a designation of that. It is literally identifying sites which support an important and distinctive flora and fauna. In terms of its planning weight, that is far less. I think where there is perhaps more to support protection of the site is the fact that we own quite a lot of it, and therefore in those negotiations we'll be coming at those negotiations as the landowner, because currently on their current proposal, and that's all it is, they're showing that they would protect a petrol station and sacrifice the local wildlife site, which seems a little bit strange. And you know, so but it's completely separate to this, and I'll bring in Mr. Edgerton, but I don't think it has a lot of bearing.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, this is actually a very technical matter. I do know that the Kent Wildlife Trust, including the Kent Nature Partnership, have been through various stages in getting to this particular stage, and those stages having involved the landowners, as Councillor Harwood has alluded to. But this stage is not about land ownership. It's not about any other matters. It is purely around the technical merits, the environmental merits of a proposed designation. And in this case, I think it's worth referring the committee to paragraph 2.4, which states that it is worth noting that the citations originate from the site's wildlife value rather than land ownership. We are asked tonight to consider the wildlife value, the ecological environmental value, and we as officers have considered the matters contained within the appendices, and we are of the view that the environmental value is worthy of supporting the citations provided by the Kent Wildlife Trust. So this is a technical matter in that regard, rather than regarding ownership. Thank you very much.
Sorry to come back, but I just do think it's really, really important, because I just think you can't look at things in isolation, and sometimes you have to look at things in the round. So if we say that this area is the local wildlife site, what bearing does that have on the potential for the road improvement scheme? Would that mean that that would never be able to go ahead, or would just be more tricky, or they would say, oh, it's a local wildlife site, doesn't matter, we're just going to do the road anyway?
I think the best thing I can say to members at this stage is that we have to consider the part of the extension that falls within Maidstone Borough. I can say that I've liaised with colleagues regarding the A229 proposals, and the very small amount of the extension that does fall, it's just to the east of Old Chatham Road, I'm informed doesn't actually affect the A229 itself and any proposed extension. That being said, Tunbridge and Morling may want to consider that particular matter, because that is the borough which is affected more by the A229 and the proximity of this proposed local wildlife site. However, for Maidstone Borough, the advice I have received is that the very small portion to the east of Old Chatham Road does not affect the proposed A229 scheme. Thank you.
And if I may come back, on the plan which is appended, and it shows the red line outlines the existing area. Yeah, the new is the green. I suggest that the red line is far more in the firing line, the existing local wildlife site is far more within the firing line of any potential, because it is only a potential being discussed, highway widening scheme, rather than the Greenland, as you can come back. And as Mr. Edgerton has stated, only the southern paddock, really, the bottom part of the green dotted line, is within Maidstone Borough that we're discussing, and that is currently not in an area being discussed anyway. So I think Mr. Edgerton is right that our bit isn't affected. The northern part of our land that's in Tunbridge and Morling is potentially affected.
Is there any way we can split the two for the voting?
I'm sure we can vote on each of the two sites separately. I'm just looking towards Councillor Clark. You moved it. Would you be happy to vote for them separately? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Right. I'd just like to say a couple of things. I think this is, it's a good report, and it's good to see more land being recognised for its ecological benefits and biodiversity. The one obviously I know both these sites. I'm sure that most of us, you go up and down, the Bluebell Hill quite a bit, but Buckland Hill is. I'm pleased to see that being given its recognition. It's obviously managed by us as a local nature reserve, as it has been for a long period of time. But for the Kent Wildlife Trust to give us this level of citation and, pointing out quite the variety of wildlife there, I think in that sort of formal sense is really good. And it shows these small areas within the urban area can be really vital. I, not just here, but when I was a councillor elsewhere, the recognition of small areas like this, which is an acre or even sites half the size of this, can actually bring nature closer to people. I think, as you were saying, Councillor Harwood, in terms of the residents in flats around it. But if you don't have these small areas, these little pocket areas of nature in an urban area, then you might not think it, but a lot of people will probably have no interaction with nature and wildlife, and have very really limited knowledge. And the benefit, we all know the benefit you get from being in areas of nature. It helps with people's mental health and so on. So that's really good. And I'm quite happy to second the proposals. I just wondered, and it might be you don't have the information, is that I'm thinking in a couple of other areas on West Maidstone. I don't know if they've already had this level of citation. I was sort of thinking the Bluebell Woods, then Fant Nature Reserve, and actually the ancient woodland of Oakwood, which within the Oakwood Park complex. I don't know if they've got this sort of level of citation, or perhaps we could point Kent Wildlife Trust, if they haven't, towards those areas.
If I may come back, Kent Wildlife Trust are intensifying their work around identifying local wildlife sites, but it is quite a technical process. So essentially, the site survey and the site management and maintenance to ensure that biodiversity is maintained are assessed and gauged in quite a technical way by Kent Wildlife Trust. But I suggest that the best way that we can get these sites on the radar is if you can have kind of citizen science and local surveys to actually record the flora and fauna on these sites, and to start to build up that evidence base. And then once you've reached an evidence base, then an approach can be made to the Kent Wildlife Trust saying, here's a site you may be interested in.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we've had the two proposals for each of the two separate sites moved, and I've seconded it. So can we take a vote then in terms of, first of all, the TM 57, which is Bluebell Hill Banks and Verges Extension. Can I see those in favour of those, please? Okay, can I see those against, please? Okay, any abstentions? Right, thank you. That is passed. Then we can go on to MA 17, the Buckland Hill Pocket Nature Reserve. Can I see those in favour of that, please? Great, thank you. That's unanimous. Right, so you'll be able to send off your letter ASAP. And that takes us on to our last item tonight, which is item number 12, which is the Medway Local Plan Statement of Common Ground. Now, a lot of the points which I suspect will want to be discussed are in the yellow papers. So I suppose at this stage I'll just ask if, in terms of the white papers, the public papers, there's any points anybody wishes to raise. Otherwise, I'll propose we go into private session. Councillor Russell.
I just think for the benefit of anyone that's watching, could it be introduced in the public session by the officer so that it's quite clear what we're talking about before we then go into private session? I mean, I could probably keep most of mine within the white papers personally, but if we're going to go there, I think we should have the introduction in public.
Sorry, thank you for correcting me. Councillor Harwood, if you want to introduce.
Thank you, Chairman. And yeah, I'll try and be circumspect because of the yellow pages. As we're all aware, part of the local plan making process is the legal test of the duty to cooperate, and this requires local planning authorities to cooperate with each other and with other prescribed bodies on strategic matters that cross administrative boundaries. The strategic matters note the position of both councils regarding various components, including housing, employment, retail, spatial strategy, infrastructure needs, natural environment and transport. But it's really important that the duty to cooperate is not a duty to agree. And as you can see from the yellow pages, there is some agreement, but there's also some disagreement. And we have, I don't know, Mark Edgerton or whether we bring in Tom Gilbert, but we have a surfeit of riches when it comes to explaining about this, but it's all in yellow papers, so good luck.
I don't know if Mr. Gilbert has anything to add to that one.
Yeah,
no, nothing.
Okay, so does anybody have any points I want to raise while we're in public session? I think, Councillor Russell, you said you had a couple of points earlier.
I was just going to say that, so it's ready to go, and what timeline does it enter into for their side of things? How close are they to the end of their local plan? Thank you.
Okay, if nobody has any further questions at this stage, short of wanting to raise issues on the yellow paper, I would suggest that we, what's the wording we have to do? Is it in? Yeah.
Does anyone actually want to raise issues in the yellow papers? Oh, okay.
I know Councillor Thompson does as ward member, and I had a couple of points.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, and it might not take that long, but there are some points. So, the formal process. So I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for item 13, exempt appendix, to item 12, Medway Council Statement of Common Ground, due to the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified, having applied the public interest test. Is that seconded? Thank you. Is that agreed? Yep. Excellent. Okay, so if we can go into private session. No, I've got it. Right, I think we're back in public session. I was just going to say, for anybody listening to the webcast, was that what we were just doing, we were noting where we've reached with Medway Council in terms of the current situation. So a number of items we've agreed and they've been closed off. We also noted that there's a number of items which require further discussion, and I think everybody present would hope that those discussions are held as fast as possible with Medway to move forward to agreement on all the items to help expedite Medway's local plan. And we've had moved by Councillor Clark the two recommendations on page 43 of our agenda pack. I could read them out, I suppose, if anybody's listening. So the first one is that the draft statement of common ground attached to exempt appendix 1 to the report be approved and delegated authority be given to the head of planning and economic development to make editorial amendments prior to Medway Council's submission of this document with their local plan for examination. And secondly, delegated authority also be given to the head of planning and economic development to make amendments to the statement of common ground during the examination period of the Medway local plan in consultation with the cabinet member for planning, policy and management. Those are the two recommendations, and the second one is definitely about reaching common ground on all the outstanding points. Can I take it that I'll second that? Is everybody happy with that? Those recommendations? Great, thanks very much. So at this point, I declare the meeting finished.